A very good morning, everyone. I don't know if it's morning or afternoon, really. It's good midday to everyone. Um, we are going to be talking about a book that emerged from a project. The View from Here: Stories and Poems of Many Indias. Now, this is an anthology that has been put together from contributions to a journal called Guftagu. Now, Guftagu is an Urdu word meaning tête-à-tête. So the idea is also to promote conversations among writers and artists, plus conversations between readers and writers, conversations among cultural producers in general, and also artists. Since the book actually emerged from Guftagu, the journal, which started in 2015, Geeta? Yeah, the journal started in 2015, but then this was also the journal of the Indian Cultural Forum. So there are two moments before this book, which we need to talk about, how the Indian Cultural Forum itself came about, and the moment of its origin, which is, when the right is coming to power in the center, and a moment of actually radical change in the Indian polity and Indian culture as well. So this Indian Cultural Forum emerges actually as a response to a particular historical moment. From that comes Guftagu, the journal. The journal actually published all kinds of writing, stories, poetry, and also it also featured art. So what I want to know from Geeta is, I'd like Geeta to speak a bit about the Indian Cultural Forum itself, and in some sense, actually, the birthing of Guftagu, and then we can take it from there about the anthology.
I don't know if I usually have a booming voice, so actually, we were accomplices, Satchidanandan and I, and like all writers, we sort of lead parallel lives. So we are writers in the public space when we pretend we are just citizens, and because we are writers, we are given a little 5 minutes of public space, 1 inch by 1 inch, and then we are writers in private. And I think we were sitting in a conference on the idea of India, and the context was, this is when Perumal Murugan was being hounded, and then you had those assassinations, the political murders of Kalburgi, Dabolkar before that. And the two of us said, we writers need to do something. Of course, what we write is political in the best sense of the word, but we need to do something more. And of course, we didn't know how to do it, but we learned on the job. We found technology would help us. We decided to set up, this was Satchidanandan, Romila Thapar, the historian, Indra Jaisingh, the advocate, and I. The four of us decided to set up something called the Indian Writers Forum. And we were going to have a site called the Indian Cultural Forum, which would look at cultural politics. And this is something we had to learn about. What is cultural politics? Then I must credit Satchi, who told me that we've spoken to all these people, to Anantamurthy, to Krishna Sopti, Mahashweta Devi, and everybody's agreed that we can't only be citizens, we can't only be writers, we are both. So we must have a journal where it is a safe space for us to write, produce art, debate, discuss, disagree. And that's how Guftagu was born. I have to also say that we learned a great deal as writers. I know I learned a great deal. I discovered what it is to be truly part of a multilingual country, what it is to include. We keep talking about inclusiveness, but in real life, what is it like to include as many young people as possible, as many writers concerned with Dalit issues, as many writers concerned with women's issues, certain regions, certain communities, on and on. So this is what it was. I have to conclude by saying that sadly, for fairly obvious reasons that I don't need to spell out, though I am in the safe space of Kerala, that we had to close the trust in 2022. But anthologies like this are testament to the fact that we will never stop speaking, whether in prose or poetry.
I would actually like to just take that last statement that Geeta just made and ask Satchi the question about the circumstances, sahacharyam. സാഹചര്യങ്ങൾ ഇത് ഈ പുസ്തകം ഉണ്ടാവാനുള്ള ഒരു സാഹചര്യം, ഈ പ്രോജക്റ്റ് ഉണ്ടാവാനുള്ള സാഹചര്യം, the Indian Cultural Forum as a project, the circumstances in which it actually comes to be, the idea of the safe space, whether it is really safe anymore, and the and this point of bringing together the various roles of a writer. Right, the writer not just as somebody speaking to the moment, but also as a witness, as a co-witness with others, a writer writing testimonials of the time, and the writer as editor, the writer as interlocutor, and the writer as historical witness. So I would just like Satchi to say something about these circumstances.
Geeta has already explained to you how Uftagu, the journal, came to be. It was an online journal. I'm sorry to use the past tense because we wanted it to continue for years together, but there were circumstances which forced us to close it down. But we haven't quite closed it down. That is exactly what this book proves. Because we have here a selection of short stories and poems which were published in that online journal, Guftagu. And Sabitha has also asked me to explain the circumstances which in some sense are obvious. I'm not going into the details, but you very well know that India is fast sliding into a kind of fascist regime. You may name it in any way. Some call it neo-fascism, some call it corporate fascism. Whatever it is, there is a kind of totalitarian, authoritarian kind of regime growing, often challenging our constitution, often buying our media up and using both the print media and the social media for their own propagation, the propagation of the idea of the so-called Hindu Rashtra. So we thought, we being secular, we being faithful to the Constitution as well as the preamble of the Constitution of India, we being writers who have always maintained our independence and the need for independence for writers and readers and artists and all the people in India, we thought we must in some way resist this continuing onslaught. You must be remembering all those terrible murders of Gauri Lankesh when I was in Bangalore, and I remember taking part in a protest along with some of the major writers in Kannada there. And then there was a whole series of murders. Then there were bans on certain kinds of food. There was isolation of all the minorities. I mean, not only religious minorities, but even sexual minorities. And then the tribal people, the Dalits, all kinds of people who are minorities, including perhaps women who are not by number a minority, but by life leading a kind of minority life. So we wanted some kind of a platform to protest what was going on, to protest the sliding of the country into an authoritarian rule. And that was how the thought of Indian Cultural Forum first came up. And as Geeta has already named some of the initiators of the forum, I remember the first meeting in Romila Thapper's house, where we first thought of this forum. There was Romila Thapar, there was Shyam Menon, who was the vice chancellor of the Ambedkar University. There was Apurvanand, who is again an insistent protester. And we had Indira Jai Singh and quite a few people who sympathized with us and who felt one with our cause. So the forum started, and then this idea came up. She has attributed it to me. Maybe I don't really remember. Anyway, we thought we should also have a journal. We couldn't afford a print journal, so we thought of an online journal. And it was Romila Thapar who gave it a name. And Guftagoo actually means a very private conversation whispered into one's ears. മലയാളത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ സ്വകാര്യം എന്ന് പറയുന്ന so that's the meaning of Gufta. It's a Parsi Urdu word. And I think she consciously chose a word from that language for reasons that you all know, because these are Urdu is again a language that is being oppressed and being gradually erased, though nobody can erase our great Urdu writers from the past to the present. So it was in that political context of growing authoritarianism that we thought of a forum working against it, and also an online journal where writers of all sorts could write, could express themselves, could express not only a very direct kind of protest against the regime, but even they could indirectly express how the polyphony of India, the multiverse that is India, is being gradually silenced and suppressed. So this is actually a protest against silence, a protest against all those who keep silent and in that way collaborate with this authoritarian regime. It is also not a noise, but a voice a human voice that we are trying to retrieve in an extremely inhuman kind of time. That, in short, is the beginning of the journey.
Satchi, you have to mention absolute proof of the success of a forum like this, which I hope young people will carry on, which was when a lot of writers, including you, gave up their awards or their positions in state institutions to protest the killing of M.M. Kalburgi first, and then shortly after, the lynching of Muhammad Akhlaq. So perhaps for the first time in post-independence India, writers were actually making a common gesture of protest. No easy thing, because we don't even have a common language to speak to each other. And then the writers inspired all kinds of other groups, including, perhaps for the first time, scientists.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, because Kalburgi's murder, like Gauri's earlier, Gauri's came after that. Yeah, Kalburgi's was the first kind of direct murder of a writer and a scholar. He's a person I know very well. I have been to his home. He is a great Kannada scholar, and he was the first victim of this fascist regime. And many of you know that several awardees returned their awards. People like me resigned from the Central Sahitya Academy at that point of time. I was a member of the executive. My term as secretary was over. So there was a widespread protest, and many of us led a kind of procession. Geeta was also there, K.K. Daruwala was there. Quite a few major writers led a procession against what happened in front of the academy. They protested loudly and properly against what had happened. So that too is in the background. Writers beginning to speak, writers beginning to be heard, writers who want to be heard, finding a platform to express themselves and to express their solidarity with all those forces which are against this cruel dictatorship, this unkind regime. So that too, as Geeta said, is part of the background of this journal and the book.
Yeah, so the very important role of this in terms of um, Indian Cultural Forum as a project itself as fundamentally a protest against silencing. It's a protest against not just silence, but protest against silencing by refusing to be put down, by refusing to be censored, by refusing uh, to be kept under surveillance, or to be willing to be kept under surveillance, rather. So there is actually a kind of outing, there's an outing that happened at that time. Either award vapsi എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട്, this became very well known as the moment of award vapsi, right? പിന്നീട് അവർ right wing media later actually kind of weaponized it as um, as some kind of pointless gesture or a troublemaking gesture. Award vapsi, like various other things that they've turned into um, moments of daring that they've actually turned into uh, just gestural politics, which actually it is not, right? So there is also an attempt here to stop a sort of misinterpretation of this, of what was actually happening in protest and in dissent against the silencing at this time. And Geeta, I just wanted to know, how much, in terms of the contributions that you selected from Guftagoo for the anthology, it is representative of many regions, many languages, the heteroglossic nature of it, the many languages that are represented here: Gujarati, Marathi, Malayalam, Tamil, Kannada, Bengali, etc. So it's like large number of languages that come together via English. English becomes the facilitator language here, and English, of course, is very much an Indian language as well. So, including English, the multiple languages represented here, the multiple regions, and the multiple age groups of the contributors. I mean, I'm also interested in knowing, your when you put this together, the idea is also to put on the same sort of days, on the same platform, people of various, not just various tongues, but also various ages, various genders, various communities and groups and genders. So it's interesting to actually know the idea of India that emerges from, this kind of representation.
Well, the title, The View from Here, is something I felt...
Where is here?
Yes. I felt very, very strongly about it, because all writers, and certainly writers in English, sitting in India, will confess that the process of writing and the business of publishing confuses you about what is here. You could lead an entire lifetime as a writer and think that there is only one India, where people write in English, get published in English. Or they write in the other Indian languages and they are stars, the canons, the people who get photographed and who give bites in literary festivals. I'm sorry, there's a lot of literatures, in the plural, in India. And I also am making a gesture. No, it's not just India. We don't want to be jingoist. We don't want to be jingoist like the right wing. But we do not want to be told what is India by people sitting in New York or London or anywhere else. So the Eurocentric stream of our education, whatever language you write in, to this day, if somebody gets an award elsewhere, that writer suddenly becomes important. Now, we need platform. That's good. All writers deserve prizes and recognition. But how do we include writers from small places, writers whose lives actually invisibilize them? It's not that they're not speaking, but they get invisibilized. So that was the challenge here. So how do we be inclusive without being sarkari and saying, one representation for each language? So I think that was the challenge. And what was really interesting was that certain thematic patterns emerged. And when I read, those will come out very sharply. What women have to say, what those with Dalit experiences have to say, what Muslims have to say, and what Muslim women have to say, what a little Irula girl has to say. These are the voices that are coming through. And it is for us, I think, our responsibility as middle class sitting in metropolitan India to say, look, there is this India. Let me facilitate the translation. Let me facilitate the publication. And all said and done, the English language has a certain hegemony. Let me bring it to the mainstream stage. That is what it was all about.
It might be nice to read there's a really short one-page short story by Madhavi Kutti. It'll be nice for you to read that if you can.
Well, we sort of divided tasks, and poetry went to the poet, and the short stories went to the fiction writer. And then because I'm a very bossy woman, I did the overall coordination. And poor Satchi had to put up with that. So the short stories, later it occurred to me that, my God, there's a lot of women writers here. So it must have, I didn't do that self-consciously. But I want to read one. I'm very proud to read a wonderful Malayalam story translated into English by a woman with many names, Madhavi Kutti, Kamala Das, Suraya, and wonderfully translated by Satchi here, and say a couple of things about two other stories. Because one thing I learned, both in my life as a writer and a citizen, is that there's no point just sitting here and glooming and dooming and saying the barbarians are at the gate, the fascists are knocking on the door. We also need to talk about hope, and that is in resistance. So let me start with The Holy Cow, Kamala Das, translated from the Malayalam by K. Satchidanandan. One day, a little boy picked up a banana peel from a garbage bin on the road. While he was eating it, a cow snatched it from his hands. The boy felt sad. He pushed the beast away. The cow ran along the street, mooing aloud. Some mendicants suddenly turned up from nowhere. "Did you hurt the holy cow?" they asked the boy. "I didn't. I only chased it away because it snatched the banana peel I was eating." "What is your religion?" asked the mendicants. "Religion? What's that?" asked the boy. "Are you Hindu or Muslim or Christian? Do you go to the temple or to the mosque?" "I don't go to any of them," the boy said. "So you don't believe in prayer?" "I don't go anywhere. I have no shirt. My trousers are torn at the back." The mendicants whispered among themselves, then turned to the boy. "You must be Muslim. You hurt the cow." "Is the cow yours?" asked the boy. The mendicants wrung the boy's neck and threw him into the garbage bin. Then they chanted together, "Om Namah Shivaya, let thy holy name be praised." Thank you.
Geeta actually was also mentioning, while we were sitting and chatting before this, Geeta was mentioning something that she realized, which is a certain kind of thematic that emerges after putting the anthology together. Sometimes these patterns were there unconsciously, and then you see it. It becomes visible only later. And there is a pattern here which is one of nurture, which is one of being a mother, being the woman being a mother, but also that not being central to her identity. However, the idea of the creator, the idea of the originator, the idea of the mother, that's one of the things that bring some of these writings together. Um, there's
Simply
also
put,
Whittaker's,
yeah, exactly. Simply put, I realized, and this is, of course, the wonderful thing about writing, whether it's your own work or putting together other people's work, it's only later that you see recurrent motifs. You sometimes, somebody from the audience will tell you, someone once told me, oh, all your titles have the plural. So I said, oh, thank you, I'm going to steal that and say that in my next panel. So I discovered that there were as many as 3 short stories in this volume by women talking about a certain strand which is problematic in today's India, but also offering hope. So I just read Madhavi Kutti's story, which is, if you like, the religious unhappiness. What is that old fault line which we are never able to annihilate? Caste. So there's a brilliant, tender little story, not shouting, but a delicate little story called The Verdict by Bama, the Tamil writer, who writes about the Dalit experience, who's been a school teacher for 40 years. And she talks about a group of school children who have an outing, field trip. They go to a movie and they're so excited. On the way back, it's a hot day like this, and they want to drink water. And some children are not allowed to drink water from the common pot. So there's another story. Tender little thing, and the principal, who should know better, and says, yes, that's okay. But there's another story called Roots by Zai Whittaker, written in English, about a little Irula girl who drops out of school because she's teased that as an Irula you eat rats, look at your hair, you've never combed your hair, so on and so forth. Then she's cheated by a shopkeeper because she's selling roots that they use for medicine. And she suddenly decides, I just want to read that moment of hope. She argues with the shopkeeper because she knows her sums. She's not getting enough change. Then she suddenly realizes it doesn't matter if she's laughed at in school. That's going to be her weapon. So it didn't matter how much the other children laughed and sniggered at her. They would get bored of it and stop at some point. And it didn't matter how difficult the alphabets were. She would learn them at some point. And it didn't matter that her slate lay broken at the bottom of the well. Appa would simply have to buy her a new one because she was going to read and write the numbers and letters, however curly they were, and no one was ever going to be able to cheat her family again. So, out of the mouths of our babes, our youth.
One important function that this anthology plays is also to somehow establish a sort of genealogy among writers whom you would not think belong together, right? I mean, there is something that's very interesting that's happening here. Like Madhavi Kutti, നമ്മുടെ എല്ലാ സ്ത്രീ എഴുത്തുകാരുടെയും അമ്മ, she's like the mother writer to all of us younger writers. So there is, there is a certain kind of genealogy being established here between languages, among languages. Even though the writings may be different, but there are, there is a kind of generational conversation and a generational genealogy here. So I would actually ask, Geeta just read Madhavi Kutti. So I just wanted to ask my father to read, Satchi, to read Pash. Pash is a revolutionary poet and was a revolutionary poet in Punjabi. There is a poem by Pash here called Bharat. Pash is actually a kind of, was a very, he was a leftist dissident writer, attacked for his views, attacked for his politics. So there is, so what this book is also doing is to distill and establish a certain line of descent, actually, right? And so there is a genealogy tree of, there's a genealogy tree with all these roots and branches coming out. And Pash and Madhavikutty, I mean, I would really think, in a way, sort of anchor this anthology.
Yeah, you must have listened to Kamala Das's or Madhavikutti's or Kamala Suraya's story read by Gita, which tells us primarily that writers are visionaries, even though the term may be too sublime to be applied to small writers like us, but writers see into the future. When Madhavikutty wrote that story, beef was not an issue, and the holiness of the cow had not been, made holy or sacred. But at that point of time, she could see what was coming. That a kind of Hindutva domination was, beginning to rise in the country, and cow was going to be worshipped, and hurting or killing a cow was going to be considered a major sin. So and again, Pash, who belongs almost to the same generation, perhaps the greatest poet after Harbhajan Singh in Punjabi, whose real name is Avatar Singh Sandhu, also sees what's coming. His poem is titled Bharat, translated by Surjit Halsi. The word I respect most, whenever it appears, all other words lose importance. It is about Bharat, the word Bharat. The word I respect most, whenever it appears, all other words lose importance. This word means the children of the land who still measure time by the shadows of trees. They have no problem but that of the stomach. And when hungry, they can chew even their own limbs. To them, life is a tradition and death means nirvana. Whenever someone talks about the national unity of all Bharat, I feel like knocking off his cap and telling him that the many meanings of Bharat do not relate to any Dushyanta. Instead, they are registered in the farms where food grows, where break-ins happen. So that's the poem. That is one of the many ideas of India represented in this book. The subtitle of the book is as important as the title, Stories and Poems of Many Indias. So that is what we are trying to defend. This manyness, if I can use the word, or this multitude that India is, many religions, many cultures, many regional forms of life and food, several systems and ways of thinking. So that's what makes India truly great. And India is not going to be great by being made a monolithic kind of nation, having only a single voice coming out of it, and that single voice always speaking to us without giving us a chance even to speak back, which is happening every day, as you very well know. So we wanted ourselves to hear, and also our readers to hear, the several voices of Muslims and other minorities, voices of women, voices of so many languages spoken in India. And that's what ultimately this anthology represents. It shows us India in its many colors, many shades, many voices. And it is this coming together, as Sabitha rightly said, this coming together of different voices, different ways of life and visions of life, that makes this anthology so unique. You get a glimpse of India, a small glimpse, even then, a glimpse of India when you go through the poems and stories in this anthology. The view from here. The view from here. You can interpret it in many fashions. So primarily, it's a view taken by somebody who tries to understand India, a perspective that perhaps we need to develop, a perspective that will help us understand that India is not single as many so-called nationalists assume, but India has several continents of existence within it. This understanding is extremely important, and that's why Tagore, the great poet who wrote our national anthem, also wrote the strongest critique of nationalism as an ideology. He was a critic of the ideology of nationalism, which creates vanity, which creates hatred, which creates war. Loving the nation is a different thing. Patriotism is natural. Even animals love the little place where they live and play about. And so we love our country, we love the people in our country, but that does not mean we should hate not only others, but even some people within our country who have been othered, or who are considered the others, who have come from outside. I'm not going into all the details, even though you will find, if you look at the history of immigrations in India, that those people who are now called Aryans, and including Romila Thapar, all historians say there is no race called Aryans. Those people were the last to come to India. First they came from African regions, then the Mediterranean regions, and finally from Central Asian regions speaking the Indo-Aryan languages. So they were the last people to come to India. If somebody has to go out first or out of India, it is those last people who came, who are immigrants and not natives. But now they say those who came before them are immigrants, or those who do not belong to their religion are immigrants, or those who do not subscribe to their political system and belief, they are aliens, they are foreigners, and they make prison camps for them, like they have already made in Guwahati, in Assam. So, and many are losing their voting rights, and I'm not going into the detailed political analysis of what is happening in India. But yes, this othering is happening, and this is a simple human voice against this othering, against turning people of other religions and other beliefs into aliens, into foreigners, a simple human voice that weeps for a country that is turning darker and darker every moment.
On a light-hearted note, we live in the age of all kinds of technology, which helps us, of course. But the subtitle, Many Indias, gave autocorrect a lot of trouble. So for a while, it was Many Indians. Then it became Many Indias apostrophe S. But the dummies that help us, technology could not understand that there can be many Indias. So I think there's a little lesson there. As in real life, there is a problem there.
There is a sort of fundamental iconoclasm here, breaking the idea of the monolithic idea of the nation, and the idea of claiming that space called the nation, which is of course a very modern construct, this idea of the nation. So there is an attempt to, in some sense, question, that very idea of what it means to be inhabiting the nation, what it means to be also inhabiting a nation which has become where there is hubris about that very idea of the nation and the patriot, and so there's a certain kind of questioning that's already implied. It doesn't have to be loud necessarily, but it's implied in the very choice of the writers, the choice of the languages, and also the choice of the pieces themselves. There is the idea of dissidence, which is just rather a disagreement with this monolithic idea of nationalism. And Geetha actually wanted one more poem. This is Changi Prasad. What's the name of the title of
It's called Firing at the Heart of Truth. And it's not just the poem that you need to hear, but the story behind the poem. We met while we were running the Indian Cultural Forum. One of the things we did was try and find young people who needed some modest financial support, if other people could donate, so that they could write. And we found the most extraordinary young man in Davanagere, whose mother is a Devdasi, whose sister is forced to be a Devdasi. And he was writing some very powerful poetry about what else? About his life, being a Devdasi. And he was assaulted by some right-wing fellows who said, if you write any more about your caste, we will cut off your fingers. So we read this in the press, and we got in touch with him. We supported him for a while. And to get his poetry to a larger audience, we got some young people from Ambedkar University in Delhi to translate, and I sort of coached them about the translation. And when Changi Prasad came to Ambedkar University, Satchi was there, Bama was there, who I spoke about, and you know, this is what education is. The young people in the audience, you know, they were just listening like this. This was a boy on the stage, exactly their age, and this is what he had to say. Firing at the heart of truth, translated from the Kannada by Ali Ehsan and Aniruddha Nagaraj. You cowards, firing at us who wield pens. You murderers, celebrating the cold-hearted killing of innocents. Let the sparrows build nests at your gunpoint. Your guns may have wounded us, but we are not just bodies, mute bodies. We are children of the earth. Our mother gives us life with every letter, strength with every word. Look, this is not blood we shed, but ink, fresh and indelible, writing the history of truth. Every drop of blood now reborn into 1,000 truths. Listen, I know you great devotees. I know the sword that chopped Shambhuka's head. I know who demanded Eklavya's thumb. I know the truth. I know that sword. I know you who became a gun to kill me. Listen, lies are not termites eating away at truth. Guns cannot destroy it either. But these pens, these countless pens, how they grow tall, strong, like a gigantic tree of many truths.
Not with the gun, but with ink, but with words. Thokukondalla vaakkukondu. So that's actually in some sense how this anthology has been put together. It's kind of, you know, it's not asking one to break India, but break the idea of India as just this monolithic, colorless, you know, just a beige-colored, monotonous male, upper caste, male-centric, whatever. You know, this idea, and that's actually very much also the way the nation has been imagined in all nationalisms. You know, it's and here, you know, there's an attempt to turn the motherland into a fatherland as well. So there's, you know, here as in not in the book, but out there. So this is resisting that out there from the view from here, right? So yeah, I would actually now like to take questions on this, on precisely all these things, right? I mean, what is the view from here? Where is here? What are the many Indias? What, you know, how, you know, the kind of a role this sort of an anthology plays in also redefining the very idea of a national polity and stories and poems.
Sabitha was scaring me a little bit. I thought I might have to become a political scientist. We're just ordinary writers.
Not not ordinary by any means, but yes, writers. Yeah. Thokuvandalla vaakund.
This is a general question. I recently completed my PhD. I'm from a literature background. So this question is not particularly linked to the book, but to the larger narratives of India as we need, resistance, about how narratives of politics is important. But during my academic journey, many of the faculties from different universities across India have asked me and my colleagues, why are your theses particularly focused on politics? Where is the literary aspect of it? You're all from literature background, but you're doing sociology, and where is the literariness in it? So how do you respond to that?
Possibly, actually, that very distinction is spurious, right? Because in writing, there are already many disciplines that writing already addresses. Writing is already located. Writing is already located, right? So writing is always already historical. Writing is actually always already anthropological. It is already always sociological, because it's not, writing doesn't happen from nowhere, right? Writing doesn't happen from nothing, but it does happen it occurs from a place, it occurs in a time, it occurs from a community, it occurs from identities. So yeah, so possibly that very distinction itself has to be tested.
Yeah, that's true. But we are asked by many
No, I
acclaimed
understand that, yeah.
writers and like scholars in the field. They ask us, where is the focus on literariness?
No, which
Are
is
you
why
from
actually
literature?
which is why it's important to look at literary devices which are used in these, right? So when one is analyzing a piece of literature, writing, any sort of writing that calls itself literary writing, possibly, it's important to look at the literary devices used, which is where rhetoric, the training in literature reading, which is where actually our training in literary reading probably comes in. But yeah.
If I've understood your question correctly, one is let me say to start with, that being questioned by your faculty and your guide and so on is perfectly okay. You needn't put them on a pedestal. Half the time they may not even know what they're talking about. So that's one thing. Okay, having said that, when we were taught literature, which is why I advise people not to do literature courses, at least at that time, we would just study English literature. So it was all by white men in an island we had not seen. So we had to unlearn and learn that even that literature that we learned was in a certain historical, sociological context, that there was politics. And because the middle class is so afraid of the word politics, as if to say, politics either means you will instantly become a venal politician or you will land up in jail under UAPA. But politics is a word that is perfectly usable, that we all practice. And there's very little literature which is not political. And you've heard the cliche that even those who say, my work is apolitical, are taking a political stand. So I think that's how you should shatter that.
Yeah, I'll respond to that with a three-line story, which was told by Louis Aragon, one of the most famous French writers. He wrote fiction, but he was primarily a poet. So Louis Aragon speaks about a person who hated the very word politics. He was completely apolitical, and he thought there was something wrong with the very idea of politics. But one day, he became the victim of a stroke. He was paralyzed, and he could not speak, but he could speak only one word, and that was politics. And using that word, he had to ask for tea and all, and he had to, get all his, primary needs satisfied. So to express his love, his hatred, his need for food, his hunger, for everything, he had to use that word politics, and he had to pronounce it in various ways. If he said politics, they knew. He was thirsty, he wanted water. Yeah, and he would say, politics, maybe he wanted some food. So he had to use many tones of that one word to get all his, to satisfy all his needs. That story tells us a lot about the apparently invisible politics that lies behind every one of our gestures, every one of our words, every one of our actions. Behind that, when I choose a particular word instead of another word, there is politics in that choice. Every political, the use of language, everything that we do has some kind of a politics. It is not the politics of slogans. It is not the politics of processions, but it is a political undertone, a political suggestion that underlies the choice, any choice in life, including the choice of language. So,
Sachi, your politics story, I must do this, reminds me of A.K. Ramanujan's essay when he says, what is India? So what is italicized? What is India? And is italicized. Then he says, what is India? And India is italicized. So.
Hi. So I was reminded of Bertolt Brecht's quote, in the dark times will there also be singing? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. And my question is closely related with this politics undertone. What I'm asking is, there is this activist art with activism as the major point in it. And then there is also this aesthetic subliminal art. So I'm not giving them a hierarchy here. This is from a confused reader. So how do we, is there a difference? That's my first question. And if at all there's a difference, how do we find that fine balance? Like, as a middle class reader, if I aspire to be a writer, is this subliminal aesthetic art affordable to me? As an Indian, can I really afford that without any political undertones? That's my question.
Well, that is the cunning of the craft and the worldview of the writer, that the politics is not a megaphone, though we don't do too badly sometimes in public space with a megaphone. The politics is elliptical. It is, embedded. So there is no such thing as separating the political in a poem or a story or a novel from the craft. So, we live in a time where we see propaganda and some very clever propaganda, So you know when something is propaganda. So as readers, as writers, as critics, as students and teachers, we have to learn to discern what is propaganda, however well done, and we have examples in history, like The Triumph of the Will, that famous film, So it was very clever craft-wise, but it was Hitlerian propaganda. So I think that is what we need to discuss and decide, come up with a consensus. Nobody here sitting on stage can tell you which is the aesthetic index we should meet and which is the political index. We are just saying there's politics there and there's a requirement for aesthetics and the beauty of truth.
If there are no more questions, it's probably time to wind up. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. And, well, yes, there will also be singing in the dark times, right? So here is to singing in the dark times and singing for the sake of singing. It doesn't have to be political singing, but the very act of singing in the dark times already is kind of a radical act, right? So, yeah, yeah. After he dies, he thinks nothing. After he dies, he speaks nothing. When he does not think or speak, he dies. From Uday Prakash. Title of the poem is Murder. So, yeah. When he does not think or speak, he dies. Well, cogito ergo sum, I suppose. Yeah, so thank you very much for all of you for being here and being witnesses to this journey, which starts as a project, distilled into a journal, and then that further distilled into an anthology. So let's
And
say
because
three
I'm a
cheers
badly
to
behaved
the
old
project.
woman, I'm going to say that do buy copies because that will support keeping the two archives of the forum online. Thank you.